All right, Maggie, thank you so very much for this invitation. It's a great pleasure, even though it's virtually, to be back to Bahia, where I'm originally from. I'm from Vitória da Conquista, actually, but I've been living in Rio Grande do Sul for some 16 years, right? Just to make a correction, I don't have a postdoctorate title so far. Só para corrigir, pessoal, que agora isso está em voga, eu não tenho título de pós-doutor. Até já fiz algumas atividades como pós-doutor, mas não fiz o estágio pós-doutoral. Mas, basicamente, eu vou colocar ali a primeira tela da minha apresentação. Let me see.
Então, foi isso. Eu andei lendo muita coisa.
Na verdade, sim. I'm gonna do some code switching. Então, eu vou ficar mudando ali... Let me just go back to Zoom. Mas, enfim, então eu tenho doutorado na área de educação, fiz, né, a minha tese sobre a língua inglesa, o universo da língua inglesa como imperativo, né, estava discutindo a questão das identidades a partir da língua inglesa. O meu mestrado foi em linguística aplicada na Universidade Federal de Santa Maria, e ali eu pesquisei um pouco de content-based instruction, né, então eu observei a aula dos 2 últimos semestres do curso de letras de 2 professoras, e aí fiz uma análise das estratégias de aprendizagem, mas numa perspectiva mais global, né? Então, eu não só observava os alunos, mas também como a professora... Como os professores incentivavam ou não o uso de estratégias. E há 11 anos eu sou professor do IFSU, Campus Sapucaia do Sul. Também sou... I'm having some problem with sharing my screen, but I'll... Okay, now I guess I know. Enfim, então eu já... trabalho lá e eu vou apresentar para vocês um dos trabalhos que eu desenvolvo ali, que é com... I'm so sorry. Que é justamente com o ensino de Modal verbs de uma forma contextualizada, né? Eu só queria compartilhar minha tela e não está aparecendo a opção aqui. Could you please help me out, Maggie? How can I share my... Okay, share content. There we go. Print. Okay. Now we are done. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, as I've already presented my bit of my curriculum, my topic will be designing guidelines for when schools reopening, contextualizing modal verbs use. I'd like to say something because this is not the actual title. I have given my speech, but then due to our context and as teachers, we are always restless, so I decided to adapt. Usually, this is guidelines for international students. As I am a coordinator of NAI, which stands for Núcleo de Assuntos Internacionais on my campus, and as we receive international students, both in high school and in higher education, we decided to make students part of the process of introducing the culture of our institution to international students. But as we are restless, and due to what's going on now, I decided to readapt these guidelines, and instead of thinking about international students, which I know is not the reality of some of the teachers who are attending this presentation, I decided to provoke us and students as well with guidelines for schools reopening or when schools reopening, knowing that we have to provide lots of changes due to COVID-19. All right, so I can see myself. I hope you can still see something of me, but why modals? I try to shorten this presentation so it fits in the 30 minutes. So because of a lot of reasons, but especially because modals are in the syllables of the second year's groups. So at IFSU campus, Sapucaia do Sul, I'm gonna change every now and again to português, fica na região metropolitana de Porto Alegre, né, Sapucaia. Eu moro em Porto Alegre, 32 quilômetros, eu estou no campus. A gente tem um ensino por nível, então a gente tem todos os alunos, são 3 cursos no matutino e 2 cursos, né, do ensino médio integrado. No vespertino são 3 cursos e no matutino 2 cursos. E os alunos, eles não assistem aula por curso, mas por nível de proficiência. Então, os alunos do segundo ano, a gente divide em grupos, digamos, do básico, intermediário e avançado. O básico, pré-intermediário, avançado, vai depender ali, né, do nível desses alunos. Mas eles têm que cumprir exatamente o mesmo currículo, né? Eles têm o mesmo, o plano de ensino é diferente, mas os syllables, o programa que eles têm que seguir é o mesmo e vai variar, e claro, como eu trabalho com os níveis avançados, a profundidade que a gente trabalha, né? We pick up the pace, we go a bit faster because they are advanced students, and we go to modal verbs in depth. And this is what I'm going to present to you. So besides being on the syllables, modal auxiliaries are used to give a proposition a degree of probability, to express one's attitude, and to perform various social functions, such as expressing politeness or indirectness when making requests, giving advice, or granting permission. Furthermore, we use modal auxiliaries to express logical probability and social interaction. So, as you can see, they are broadly used. They have very broad functions, and I think it's something interesting to reflect, to make students reflect, and to make sure that they understand the meaning and also they are able to use them more effectively. I'd like to ask you, because I know there are many teachers in service there, how do you usually work with modal auxiliaries? So if you can use the chat to tell us if you use in the traditional way, which is fill in the blanks, or if you do something differently, I would like to know. I'm not quite sure, but I can see what you are writing on the chat. I'm sorry for that, but I'm gonna use some examples when I presented, or even when I were an English teacher before my master's and my PhD. I usually gave examples, then I explained the rules of structure and meaning, like can for abilities, possibilities, and may for permission, and etc. There, infinitive, that with modal verbs, you can make the interrogative just putting the modal auxiliary before the subject, and this kind of things. And then students would fill out the blanks with the correct modal auxiliary. So this is usually what I've done. And some suggestions, because of course, I'm working with advanced students. I had the opportunity to work with students from the basic group once, but you have different realities. So of course you can adapt what I'm suggesting here. So you can, my starting point would be give students authentic tests. So where modal auxiliaries are used for real. Instead of starting with the grammatical, explanation, I think it's more useful and more, it makes, it's more meaningful for them to work with texts. If you go to Google, and if you Google guidelines, guidance, there will be plenty of examples of modal auxiliaries being used in authentic tests, and you can start with that. So another suggestion is for you to make students reflect on the meaning and the context. So some questions you should ask your students. Who's talking to whom? Is there a hierarchy? Is it a rule, a suggestion, a prediction? How sure is the speaker, or how sure are the speakers about their statement? So of course, it's better for this to work, for you to get an authentic test. So modal verbs are used to make meaning, and then you'll be able to make this kind of reflections of real use of modal verbs. Are you following me? Because I lost control of Zoom. Let's hope I'm listening. Okay, so some other suggestions are beyond filling in the blanks, okay? So for example, you can sit with your students and let's think of some rules in the classroom or in school. If you were the principal, what kind of rules, what kind of behavior would you expect from other people? So they can sit there and they can write down what they think it's important for the classroom to work well. Then you can ask students, if they were the principal at school, or in case they are adults, let's think of EJA, Educação para Jovens e Adultos. A Meg estava falando alguma coisa sobre dar aula no noturno, né? Então os alunos estão num outro contexto. E daí, se ele é um CEO de alguma empresa, o que eles poderiam, né, como é que eles poderiam contextualizar essa questão dos modal auxiliaries? So you can ask them to state some rules, being the CEO of a company or the principal of a school, some codes, procedures that have to be followed in pandemic times, to be more specific, because it changed for everybody. So the use of masks, there will be some kind of protection for the face, like those plastic masks, the kind of hygiene. So all of this, you can bring it to the discussion to work with modal verbs. So you can, another suggestion, pick up an advice column in a magazine in English, and you just present the part where the person is asking for an advice, a piece of advice. And then ask the students to answer accordingly. And then you can compare what the reporter answered, what was the suggestion by the psychologist, etc. So I think then you can see that modal verbs are used in very real situations. The main point here is to reflect on and to produce a plethora of meanings that different modal verbs can make. So you can use, in the same sentence, you can use should, you can use ought to, you can use can, and then you can check what changes does it make when you change the auxiliary. Sorry. Okay, I guess you're still seeing my presentation, right? So I actually use two main principles to guide my lessons, which are the TBL, which is task-based learning, and project-based approach. Due to time constraints, I'll keep with just project-based approach. So some principles that I apply. It's not something that you do in one classroom and then you forget the next class you go to a different subject. So it takes 5 to 6 classes for this activity to be completed. There is a final product that will be evaluated throughout the process. So the students, I beg your pardon, they have to produce this guide for schools reopening. This is the product that will be evaluated, but the whole process as well. All the steps must be followed so that the students can get the maximum grade. So I usually give them 4 points, is the maximum grade. So they have all the steps to follow if they want to get the maximum grade. It's nothing like at the last minute they go to Google, they type a text, and then they translate and they give it to me. It doesn't work this way. So they have to take part of the process. Since learning is a process, I have to evaluate them from the starting point to the final product. So it's very important for them to follow all the steps. And I use rubrics, which I discuss with students before they present. So it can serve, these rubrics that I'll present in the next slide, they can serve as a checklist. So I present this to the students in Portuguese, and this is what I give them. And if you take a look, you have then 8 items, and you have from 0 to 5. So the students are evaluated in each item from 0 to 5. And then I do the math, like 0.5 times 8 is equal to 4. So I do the math, and then that's their final grade. Então, alguns aspectos que eu costumo avaliar, né? Então, eu estou chamando aqui de guia de retorno às aulas, né? GRA, eu abreviei ali. É interessante, traz imagens e informações relevantes para garantir a segurança de alunos e servidores no campus, na escola, enfim. As imagens são condizentes com o texto, então aqui a gente também pode trabalhar com multimodalidade, né? Então a gente pode ver que tem uma imagem super legal, mas isso aqui tem a ver com esse aspecto do texto, né? Qual é a relação que isso guarda? Né? O tamanho e a cor da fonte deixam a leitura atraente e prazerosa. Eu sou obcecado, assim, eu detesto sentar para uma apresentação e a letra está muito pequenininha, a gente tem que fazer um esforço para ler. Né? Outra coisa, por exemplo, fundo amarelo e letra branca é impossível de ler. Né? Então, os alunos têm que ficar atentos a esses aspectos. Né? A diagramação, né, do guia de retorno a aulas é bem pensada, ajuda a guiar a leitura. Né? Então, o uso de letras para cada tópico ali, letras numa cor diferenciada ou numa fonte maior, né? Os Modal Auxiliaries são utilizados adequadamente. Eu não vou ler toda a tabela, até o final da apresentação eu posso disponibilizar, mas só para vocês terem ideia que eu avalio não só questões linguísticas, né? Por exemplo, o item 7 tem a ver com a pronúncia e com a linguagem, né? O item 6 também tem a ver com a linguagem, mais especificamente os Modal Auxiliaries. Mas eu tento fazer lendo o texto como um todo, e a avaliação vai partir daí. Então, não é só a língua inglesa, mas como esse texto vai funcionar, como esse texto vai ou pode ser consumido. Então, o que eu tenho feito, né, nos últimos 4 anos, como eu disse para vocês, antes eu trabalhava com Guide for International Students, para alunos estrangeiros, já que eu sou coordenador do Núcleo de Assuntos Internacionais do meu campus. Mas, né, como a gente é inquieto, né, então agora com esse contexto de Covid também, porque a gente fica angustiado, né, não só os alunos como os professores, quando a gente vai voltar e quando voltar, como é que vai ser. Então, eu estou adaptando isso. So, coming back to English, students read a text where modal auxiliaries are abundant. Se vocês botarem guidelines for schools reopening, ou se vocês colocarem guidelines for classes to start again, or guidance, enfim, vocês vão ter vários textos assim, eu recomendo especialmente os da Unesco, né? Então vocês vão ter vários textos, e assim num parágrafo tu consegue 2, 3, 4, até 4 modal auxiliaries sendo usados. E aí é bem importante eu acho interessante, pelo menos, que os alunos possam refletir a partir daquele material. So, they first focus on meaning of the text, né? Eu nunca ensino para eles, por exemplo, o pre-teach vocabulary. Eu nunca vou ensinar os modais, né? Os modais eles vão vir depois. Eu vou ensinar palavras que são mais interessantes para uma compreensão geral do significado. After that, they are given in groups of 3 or 4 sentences with the modal auxiliaries, and they are asked to categorize them according to this table. So here is the table. I give them the sentences. This time, the modal verbs, they are highlighted. And we have here, it's in Portuguese again. I adapted from Dias and Jucá, this. So you have examples, and then you take a look. And does this example, the modal verb, does it indicate deduction, certainty, probability, speculation, hypothesis? So they are going to put the sentences according to what these modal auxiliary indicate, and finally they will pick up the modal verbs, and they are going to write down the modal verbs on the table. Okay, so this is the first phase. So it takes about from 1 to 2 lessons for them to do this. And then after they have worked with the table, we correct and we discuss some sentences, and then we can see that some may be in 2 or more categories, some sentences taken from this text will only fit one category, and so on. So we have an agreement which ones belong to which category, and finally they fill out the column in the middle. The column in the middle, I'm gonna show you again, sorry, it's hard to go back here. I don't think, okay, oh dear. That's because I'm using my cell phone, so let me see. Okay, now all right, I just want to show you the table again. So the modal goes in the middle. That's why we go back to reflect which exact word can show that is deduction, relation, certainty, relation, probability, relation, and so on. So this is the column of in the middle that I was referring to. And then if there is time left, students are asked to figure out what modal can be used for what meaning. So they start making this relation, the modal with the intended meaning. And then I present to students a guideline for reopening schools. And finally, they are invited to reflect on their environment, their school, where they live, how do they come to school, etc. Think what kind of rules and behaviors are expected in this new reality. So the test itself is, again, in groups of 3 or 4, they start thinking and writing down ideas. They can work in 4 categories. So I can suggest distance and safety rules, structure and signs with instructions. I mean structure, not instructions, the first one. So structure, you have to have like PRL in the school for students to use, and then you have the tables or the chairs or the desks. They have to be at least 2 meters far from each other. So these kind of things, remember, they are principles of the school, so they have to consider the structural thing as well. Then transport from and to school, how it's going to work. Are they going to use the plastic masks only when they are at school or only in the transportation? Okay. Pessoal, eu recebi aqui uma mensagem que vocês não estavam conseguindo escutar. Normalizou agora, não?
Tá normal, estamos ouvindo sim, querido.
Tá, desculpa, então vou voltar para lá. I'm sorry. Let me try to do it all over again. Eu já estou terminando. São mais 3 slides, e aí a gente vai justamente para a parte do projeto. Let me, oops. Okay, there we go. Okay. Okay. Let me, oops, again. Sorry for that. So this is the task itself. So as I was talking about, transport was the last thing I was talking about, and then some suggestions, like, for example, how to keep mental health in all this situation, or tips for studying during high stress time. So students can work on these 4 categories, which is distance and safety rules, structure and signs with instructions, transport, and then the suggestions. This is for the teacher to make sure that the students will use an array of modal auxiliaries. So they will not only use should, or must, but because we have different functions and different intentions here, they'll be able to use many modal auxiliaries. So the second step is, in their groups, they judge from the sentence that they wrote down which ones are more important or relevant, etc. Then they reflect on the level of certainty. Is it a rule? Is it if it's a rule, if it's a suggestion, and the best way of conveying those meanings. And we have a computer lab. I'm sure that not all schools have a computer lab, or sometimes they have a computer lab, but they can use all the time. But then they do this with the layout to present the guidelines. And on the review phase, so there is one class that is solely for me to check with students what they've done, if there are many mistakes, if it's possible for us to read what is written there, if the pictures are matching with what is written, and so on. So one class is like this review phase that I call. And then I kind of provoke them, depending on the group. If they have a good use of modal auxiliaries already, I ask them to think, what if we change can for may, or can for could, or whatever. The intention is to make them reflect on their modal auxiliaries used. Something that I usually do is to make sure that students pay attention to their classmates' presentation. We can have like some kind of election, so they can vote for the most original, or the most intriguing, or the most important piece of advice, suggestion, or rule presented. And then how does the evaluation take place? Well, of course, seeing education as a process, it goes through the whole process. But they work is evaluated, not they work, but their work, actually. There is a typo there. Their work is evaluated according to the rubrics presented. Remember that I showed you the rubrics, so these rubrics, they will be evaluated according to that rubrics. And then my suggestion for you, that you can adapt, change, but the most important thing, in my opinion, is to give students time enough to reflect on the modal auxiliaries used, to use them in a real communicative context, and to have a chance to reflect on and rewrite their work. So they have to be able to write something and to read what they've written and to improve their writing. So I think this is a very important step in the process. So the results, they present their folder in front of the class and they read the instructions aloud. Something that I've done the last years is that they can also present that as an exhibition. So where students can vote for the best ones based on categories, defined beforehand. So for example, as all the second grade students have class at the same time, you can invite other groups to visit to this exhibition and then to vote to choose, and then you can not only the best one, but you can, you know, especially working with teenagers, it's interesting to provoke them. So which one is more intriguing? Which one is more unusual? Which one? So they like this kind of categories, and then they will read their classmates or their colleagues' guides more attentively to try to pick up this kind of other meanings. So I hope I could do all in the time. And then if you have questions, please use the chat. And then Maggie can tell me, because as I'm presented, I can see the chat right now. Thank you very much.